high-scoring answers. And of course, we do many practice tests together, so you will feel confident for your test. You can find the link to the IELTS materials in the description box. And now let's get started. Here you can see the reading passage. Let's start with the instructions. What do they say? You should spend about 20 minutes on questions 1 to 13, which are based on reading passage 1 below. Then comes the passage. And here you can see first, because at that point, you have absolutely no idea what the questions are about. So you don't know which information you need to look for. And this means that you waste valuable time. Therefore, go to the questions first, read the questions, and then when you know what you have to look for, scan the passage and look for the relevant information in the passage. And that's what we are going to do now. But first, let's read the instructions of questions 1 to 5. The instructions say, do the following statements agree with the information given in reading passage 1? Whoops. So the question is whether they agree with the information given in reading passage 1. In boxes 1 to 5 on your answer sheet, write true if the statement agrees with the information, false if the statement contradicts the information, and not given if there is no information on this. So obviously, these are true, false, not given questions. I'm going to write this down here. And they're called like that because you have to read the statement and then you have to decide whether the statement is true, false, or not given. Let's start with the first statement. Here it says, 50% of garbage produced in the United States is put under the ground. Now, at this point, we have no idea what the reading passage is about. So let's have a look at the passage and let's look for the information we need to decide whether the statement is true, false, or not given. We are looking for garbage produced in the United States, and we want to know whether 50% of that garbage is put under the ground. Can we find something about this in the passage? Let's start with the first paragraph. And if you have a look at the paragraph, you can immediately see that it talks about percentages here. So this may be relevant to our question because here it says 50% of garbage produced in the United States is put under the ground. So the statement talks about percentages. Let's have a look whether the first paragraph can tell us anything about that. In 1960, the United States recycled only 7% of its waste. Today, the figure is 32%, an impressive increase, but half of all American waste still gets sent to landfills every year. This is super interesting because here it says, half of all American waste still gets sent to landfills every year. So half, what is half? Half is 50%, right? And our statement mentioned 50%. 50% of garbage is put under the ground. We still don't know whether 50% of garbage in the United States is buried under the ground because it talks about landfills. And we need to know what landfills are. So let's continue reading. Landfills are huge open spaces where rubbish is buried, compacted, and covered. There are approximately 3,000 such sites across the US, accepting mainly domestic rubbish, but also non-hazardous industrial waste. So landfills are spaces where rubbish is buried. Now, let's again have a look at our statement. The statement says 50% of garbage produced in the United States is put under the ground. And the first paragraph says that half of all American waste, so 50%, is sent to landfills. And landfills are spaces where rubbish is buried, compacted, and covered. And this means that 50% of garbage produced in the United States is put under the ground because it's sent to landfills where the rubbish is buried. So the statement is true. This statement agrees with the information given in the passage. So I'm going to write down true. Let's continue with the next statement. Number 2, One problem with landfills is that they produce a gas responsible for climate change. So we're looking for problems with landfills, and we want to know whether they produce a gas that is responsible for climate change. There was nothing about that in the first paragraph, so let's have a look at the second paragraph. Does it say anything about that? Landfills serve an essential purpose, but environmental campaigners have pointed out multiple issues with their use. This is interesting because our statement talks about a problem, and this section talks about multiple issues, and issues are problems. So let's continue reading. They are unsightly. They require the destruction of natural habitats for wildlife. Some rubbish contains toxic substances that can leak into the earth, and the large-scale compacting of food waste releases methane, which contributes to global warming. This is the answer to our question, right? Here it says, the large-scale compacting of food waste releases methane. Methane is a gas. And this is the word our statement mentioned. It's a gas which contributes to global warming. Let's again have a look at our statement. What did it say? One problem with landfills is that they produce a gas responsible for climate change. Here we have a gas, methane, which contributes to global warming. So it contributes to climate change. Here you can see that in IELTS reading, words are often paraphrased. The passage doesn't talk about a gas, it talks about methane, but methane is a gas. And it says it contributes to global warming instead of climate change. So you always need to look for paraphrasing and make sure that you understand the meaning of the words to answer the questions correctly. So this statement is true. I'm going to write down true here. We move on to the next question. The American government was criticized for not introducing landfill control laws before the 1970s. Guys, 1970s is an excellent keyword. It's a year, and years cannot be paraphrased. So if the passage talks about that, you will find this number, this year, exactly like that in the passage. So let's look for 1970 or 1970s. Let's have a look. Here the passage mentions 1960. This is not what we're looking for. Let's continue. The second paragraph doesn't mention a year at all. Next paragraph, 1930s, 1960s. We're not interested in those, but here it says, by the 1970s. So let's read this sentence more closely. By the 1970s, it was clear that landfills had the potential to cause serious environmental damage, and the government responded by introducing the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. And then the passage goes on talking about this act here. It says, this piece of legislation requires management companies to ensure that landfills do not harm the planet, and so on. And then the section ends and doesn't talk about the 1970s anymore. So what does our statement say? The American government was criticized for not introducing landfill control laws before the 1970s. Does the paragraph say anything about that? Were they criticized for not introducing such control laws before the 1970s? There is nothing about that in this paragraph. The paragraph talks about the 1970s here, by the 1970s, but it doesn't say that before that the government was criticized for not introducing control laws. Let's quickly have a look at the remaining passages whether they say anything about that. There is nothing here. I can't see anything here. And that's it. There is nothing about that in the passage. And what's the correct answer if you can't find the information in the passage? It's not given. Many IELTS students make the mistake of thinking that the correct answer is false because they can't find the information in the passage. But that's wrong, because if the information is not in the passage, the correct answer is not given. We cannot say whether the statement is true or false because we don't have enough information given in the passage. So the answer is not given. We will move on to the next statement. City residents said they were mostly discouraged from composting because of the difficulty of the process. So we're looking for composting. The city residents said they were discouraged from composting because of the difficulty of the process. So let's have a look at the passage. Where does the passage talk about composting? We had a look at the first, second, and third paragraph. There was nothing about composting in there. So let's move on. Can we see anything about composting in this paragraph? Let's quickly scan the paragraph to see whether there is anything about composting. I can't see anything. This is a description of a landfill. The section describes a landfill in detail here. There is nothing about composting. Let's move on. The next section also talks about landfills and their impact on the surrounding area, but there is nothing about composting. Next. Here in this paragraph, I can see the word composting. So let's read this one more closely. Let's start reading here. There are viable alternatives to landfill, such as recycling and composting. But after decades of easy waste disposal, the US has been slow to embrace these solutions. In countries like Japan and Sweden, recycling domestic garbage is required by law and waste must be sorted by material. And then the paragraph goes on saying that in the US, there is no national requirement to do so. Whoops, that was the wrong color. But this doesn't tell us anything about composting, right? And what citizens think about it. But here, composting is described more closely. So let's start reading from here. Composting, a process that allows biological substances to break down naturally, is another easy way to reduce landfill. But it is thought that less than 10% of the US food waste is currently disposed of in this way. So why is that? And now the passage tells us why. Reasons given for not composting include a lack of physical space. Those living in urban areas are unlikely to have gardens to accommodate compost heaps, and a feeling that the process is dirty because it relies on worms and insects. So the passage says that the reasons for not composting include a lack of physical space and the feeling that the process is dirty. It doesn't say that the process is too difficult. And if you have a look at the sentence before that here, you can see that the sentence says it's an easy way to reduce landfill. So composting is an easy process. And our statement says, city residents said they were mostly discouraged from composting because of the difficulty of the process. So obviously this statement is false because it contradicts the information given in the passage. The passage says it's an easy process. It's not a difficult process. So false is the correct answer. Let's move on to the next question. Number 5. The amount of rubbish produced by the United States is not in proportion to the size of its population. So we are looking for the amount of rubbish produced, and we want to know whether it's not in proportion to the size of its population. Does the passage tell us anything about that? Let's have a look. So where do we have to look? Let's scan the passage. In the first 3 sections, there was nothing about whether this is proportionate or not. Here, the landfill is described. There is also nothing about that. Also, in the next section, I can't see anything. We just read this one here that was about composting. So let's have a look at the last section. Activists argue that merely encouraging the public to recycle or compost isn't enough. Levels of consumption are sky high in the US. The average American produces 3 times the global norm in waste, and the country also produces 12% of all the world's waste, in spite of being home to just 4% of its population. This is super interesting. Our statement says the amount of rubbish produced by the United States is not in proportion to the size of its population. What does the passage say? The passage says the country produces 12% of all the world's waste, in spite of being home to just 4% of its population. So we have 12% of the world's waste and being home to 4% of the world's population. And our statement says that the amount of rubbish produced in the US is not proportionate. So it's not in proportion to the size of its population. And that's what the section says, right? That's what the last paragraph tells us. We have 12% and 4%. And so this is not proportionate. That's why the correct answer is true. The statement agrees with the information given in the passage. We have found all correct answers for the true, false, not given questions. Amazing, well done. By the way, if this video is helpful to you, hit the like button. Also, comment down below whether you want more IELTS reading practice tests. Write yes if you want more. If you want something else, tell me your video wish in the comments so I know what you would like to see on this channel. Now, let's continue solving this test. Let's move on to the next questions. Question 6. The instructions say, look at the diagram below. Write no more than 2 words from the passage for each answer. Write your answer in boxes 6 to 9 on your answer sheet. And here you can see a diagram. It says a typical landfill design. And here are the questions. So you need to find the words that fit in there. You need to label this diagram. This is a diagram label completion question. I'm going to write this down here because you need to label the diagram as you can see here. So how do we proceed? The first question we need to answer is question number 6 here, where it says C. And you can see C here in the diagram. So we need to know what this is, this here. This is what we are looking for. So let's have a look at the passage. Where does the passage talk about a landfill? Because here it says a typical landfill design. Okay, this is what we're looking for. We need to look for information that tells us what a typical landfill design looks like. And we saw that already in the passage. This is this paragraph here, right? This paragraph talks about landfills and what they look like. So let's read this one more closely. Let's start from here. On the surface of a landfill are two layers of cells, individually the day's worth of waste. What is super important now is that you have an orientation. If you read the whole section and then go back to answer the questions, you likely won't remember which belongs to which. So which label belongs to which part in the diagram. So therefore, it's smart to look at what you can see around the thing that you need to label, because a few things are already labeled here. For example, those. And if you look for that in the passage, it's very likely that this one here comes right after that. So here we have B and here we have A. B and A are given here. So we look for B and A in the passage. We look for groundwater and compacted clay. And then, because this is so close to C, we should get some information about C. So let's look for groundwater and compacted clay in this section here. Let's scan the section and let's look for groundwater and compacted clay. I can't see anything at the beginning, also can't see anything in the middle. At the end, here we have it. Here it says compacted clay and groundwater. Let's read the last sentence from here. This liner is the final barrier between the landfill and the natural compacted clay and groundwater below. We don't know what this liner is referring to, so we need to read the sentence before that. Let's start reading from here. Under the gravel is a geotextile mat, an extra layer of protection to catch any escaped leachate. And at the very bottom, a plastic liner. This liner, now we know what this liner refers to. It refers to the plastic liner. Is the final barrier between the landfill and the natural compacted clay and groundwater below. Now, let's again have a look at our diagram. We know that B is the compacted clay and A is the groundwater. And what borders the compacted clay? Because this is C, right? This is what we are looking for. What borders the compacted clay? The answer is plastic liner, because the plastic liner is the final barrier between the landfill and the compacted clay and groundwater below. This is the compacted clay, this is the groundwater below, and this here is the plastic liner. It's the natural barrier. It's not the natural barrier, it's the final barrier. So we have to write down plastic liner here. This is the correct answer. Now, let's continue with E here. We are looking for E. E is here in the diagram. I'm gonna choose a different color so you can see this better. E is here. And as you can see, E is very close to C here. So let's look for our plastic liner here and let's see whether it says anything about E, about the thing before the plastic liner. What comes before the plastic liner? Let's again have a look at this sentence here. Under the gravel is a geotextile mat, an extra layer of protection to catch any escaped leachate. And at the very bottom, a plastic liner. Guys, here we have it. The correct answer is geotextile mat. It's under the gravel, and then comes the plastic liner. And here you can see, if you have a closer look, here it says F, gravel layer. So F is the gravel, then comes the geotextile mat, and then see the plastic liner. So geotextile mat is the correct answer. Let's continue with G. Where can we find G in our diagram? G is here. Okay, so G is here. As you can see, then comes F here, and F is our gravel layer. This is already given. And before G comes H. What do we know about H? H is the soil layer. So what we're now going to do is we look for gravel layer and soil layer in the passage, and then we should know what G is. It should give us some information. So soil layer and gravel layer, where can we see it? Here, I already got it. Here it says a layer of soil and a layer of gravel. So let's read this sentence more closely. Let's start reading from here. This must be prevented from penetrating the earth below the landfill. So it passes first through a layer of soil, then a drainage layer, and then a layer of gravel. What passes through these layers? It says it. So let's read the sentence before that so we know what's going on here. As the rubbish breaks down, it turns into a toxic liquid called leachate. So the leachate must be prevented from penetrating the earth below the landfill. So it passes through a layer of soil, a drainage layer, and then a layer of gravel. Let's again have a look at our diagram. F is the layer of gravel. H is the soil layer. It passes through a layer of soil here and the gravel layer here. And what is G? What does it say? It says drainage layer here. Drainage layer. This is the correct answer. This is what we are looking for. So let's write drainage layer. Finally, let's have a look at K here. Where can we find K in our diagram? K is here. So what can we see here? What is D? D is the leachate pipe. This is what it says here. K, we don't know. And F, where the leachate pipe obviously starts, here is our gravel layer, the one we just read about. So let's have a look at the passage, whether it can tell us anything about K. Let's continue with the next sentence. We just read that the leachate passes through a layer of soil, a drainage layer, a layer of gravel. So now we are here. The layer of gravel is F. So we are here. And this is where the pipe starts, which you can see here. So let's have a look what the passage says. The passage says, here a pipe collects the liquid. Exactly, this is what is happening in the diagram, right? And diverts it out of the landfill. It is collected in a leachate pond and chemically treated to make it less dangerous. And then the passage goes on talking about what is under the gravel, the geotextile mat. This is what we read about before. So this means, guys, that the word we are looking for, K, is the leachate pond, this here. So we are going to write down leachate pond and pay attention here. Leachate is a difficult word. It's not a common word. You may not be used to it. So write it down and make sure that you spell it correctly. Leachate pond. If you have written down the word and you are unsure, go back to the passage. It's really worth investing a bit of time here. Go back to the passage, read it again, leachate pond, and have a look whether you have written it correctly. If you spell it wrong, the answer is incorrect, even if you found the correct word. That's why it's super important making sure you don't misspell any words. Awesome, we are done with our diagram label completion questions. Amazing, great job. We will move on to questions 10 to 13. Choose the correct answer, A, B, C, or D. Write the correct letter in boxes 10 to 13 on your answer sheet. These are multiple choice questions because you have to pick the correct answer out of several choices. Let's have a look at question number 10. What is one factor that led to the introduction of landfill sites in the United States? One factor that led to the introduction of landfill sites. Now, let's have a look at the passage and let's check whether we can see anything about a factor that led to the introduction of landfill sites in the US. Let's have a look. In paragraph 1, there were only numbers. There was nothing about that. Let's move on. We're looking for information in the passage that tells us why landfill sites were introduced. Let's have a look at paragraph number 2. Paragraph number 2 says that landfills serve an essential purpose, but we are not interested in the purpose. We are interested in why they were introduced. Here, the paragraph talks about precursors to landfills. This is interesting because we are interested in a time before. Let's start reading from here. However, precursors to landfills were even worse for the planet and for human health. In the 19th century, Americans simply threw their garbage into the street, including food waste and animal waste. In the early 20th century, local authorities tried to solve this problem by collecting the waste and burning it. But this caused terrible air pollution. And so the idea of landfill sites was born. This is it. This is what we were interested in, right? This is about the introduction of landfill sites and why were they introduced. Let's again have a look at our answer choices. Setting fire to waste was harming the environment. People could not rely on the garbage collection service. There was nothing in the passage about that. Animal waste left in the street was causing disease. There was nothing about a disease in the section. Urban areas had no more space for garbage disposal. Guys, let's have a look at the passage. What does it say? It says that Americans threw their garbage into the street, including food waste and animal waste. They tried to solve this problem by collecting the waste and burning it, but this caused air pollution. So, which is the correct answer? The correct answer is A. Setting fire to waste was harming the environment because it caused air pollution. So A is the correct answer. So on our answer sheet, we write down.
Here's the reality. Degree took 4 years and $100,000.
We continue with the next question. Which of the following opinions does the writer express in the passage? So this is about opinions, and we have to figure out which of these opinions the writer expresses. So what are the choices? People living near landfill sites will struggle to sell their properties. People living near landfill sites should receive financial compensation. As you can see, the answer choice is all people living near landfill sites here. So we don't have to read what comes after that here at this point. Let's jump for paragraphs. We already read them. Let's have a look at the next one, landfill sites. There was nothing about that in the first 4 paragraphs. We already read them. Let's have a look at the next one here. When landfills are constructed in this way and properly managed, their impact on the surrounding area is minimized. This is interesting because this is about the impact on the surrounding area. And our question here includes answer choices starting with people living near landfill sites. So this is about the area around the landfill sites, right? So let's continue reading. But it can never be eliminated entirely. Then comes what experts say about landfills and their impact on the environment. And if you continue reading, you can see that here it says, it is estimated that living near a large landfill decreases the value of a home by almost 13%, and American landfills have tended to be built in low-income areas that are home to minority groups, since these groups may have less power to challenge the construction of new facilities. It could be argued that landfills are a social as well as an environmental issue. What are the answer choices? People living near landfill sites will struggle to sell their properties. Is this an opinion of the writer? Does the writer say that people living near landfill sites will struggle to sell their property? Here you need to pay a lot of attention. The passage says that living near a large landfill decreases the value of a home by almost 13%. This is estimated. But it's not an opinion of the writer that people living near landfill sites will struggle to sell their properties. The passage mentions a simple estimate, but there is nothing in the passage that people will struggle to sell their properties. So you can see, although this seems related, it's not the same. So you need to be very careful. Let's continue. The passage says that landfills have tended to be built in low-income areas that are home to minority groups, and they have less power to challenge the construction of new facilities. Let's have a look at answer choice B. People living near landfill sites should receive financial compensation. This is not in the passage. People living near landfill sites may find it hard to campaign against them. This sounds correct, right? They may find it hard to compete against them. Why? Because they don't have the power to do so. The passage says that they were built in low-income areas, home to minority groups, and they have less power to challenge, so to campaign against the construction of new facilities. This is the correct answer. Let's quickly have a look at answer choice D to make sure that we can rule D out. People living near landfill sites should speak up about the pollution they suffer. This is not in the passage. The writer doesn't express this opinion. So C is the correct answer. So we write down C on the answer sheet. Let's continue with question number 12. Why does the writer mention Japan in the passage? This word is crucial, Japan, because this is an excellent keyword that cannot be paraphrased. You will find Japan exactly like that in the passage. So let's have a look at the passage and let's see where it talks about Japan. Where does it talk about Japan? I can't see anything here. Here in this paragraph, it says Japan. So let's start reading from here. In countries like Japan and Sweden, recycling domestic garbage is required by law, and waste must be sorted by material. So recycling domestic garbage is required by law, waste must be sorted by material. In the United States, however, there is no national requirement for households to recycle, nor for items to be separated. So let's have a look at our answer choices. What do the answer choices say? A, its rules about recycling contrast with those in the United States. Is this the reason why the writer mentions Japan in the passage, that the rules about recycling contrast with those in the United States? This seems correct, right? Because the passage says that in countries like Japan and Sweden, recycling domestic garbage is required by law. So the rules relating to garbage are different, because here it says in the United States, however. This is a word that's super important. Always pay attention. If you see the word however in a reading passage, this means that an idea is changed. It's like this here, but it's different there. In the United States, however, there is no national requirement for households to recycle. So answer choice A is correct. The rules about recycling contrast with those in the United States. And this is why the writer mentions Japan in the passage. Let's quickly have a look at the other answer choices to make sure that we can rule them out. It is an example of a country that manages landfill effectively. This is not in the passage. It recycles the majority of its domestic and commercial waste. Also not in the passage. Its citizens were slow to accept new laws on waste disposal. This is also not in the passage. So Answer choice A is correct. So you have to write down A on your answer sheet. Finally, let's have a look at question number 13. Why might asking individuals to recycle more be inadequate to solve the United States waste problem? The question says that asking individuals to recycle more may be inadequate. And why is that? Let's have a look at the passage. Where does the passage talk about that? If we have a look at the first paragraphs, there was nothing about that in the paragraphs. We remember that. Then this is the paragraph that described the landfill design. There was nothing about that either. The next paragraph also didn't talk about it. The next one was about composting, also didn't talk about it. So we're left with this one. Let's have a closer look at the last paragraph. Activists argue that merely encouraging the public to recycle or compost isn't enough. Levels of consumption are sky high in the US. The average American produces 3 times the global norm in waste, and the country also produces 12% of all the world's waste, in spite of being home to just 4% of its population. Mandatory recycling and dramatic lifestyle change may be the only way to bring the landfill situation under control. Let's again have a look at our question and at the answer choices. Why might asking individuals to recycle more be inadequate to solve the United States waste problem? A says only certain sections of the population tend to respond to such requests. This is not in the passage, so A is out. Companies rather than individuals are the United States' worst polluters. This is also not in the passage. Landfill sites will remain open anyway because they provide employment. Also not in the passage. Americans also need to reduce the amount that they buy and throw away. This seems to be the correct answer because here it says, activists argue that merely encouraging the public to recycle or compost isn't enough. Levels of consumption are sky high in the US. The average American produces 3 times the global norm in waste. And we need a dramatic lifestyle change. So this is what our answer choice says, right? Americans need to reduce the amount that they buy and throw away. They need to reduce consumption. So this is the correct answer. So you write down D on your answer sheet. Awesome. We're done with the multiple choice questions. Well done. That's it. This was the first passage of this IELTS reading practice test. I hope you liked this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe.
Okay, so good evening again, once again. So thank you for everyone who has joined, and thank you for everyone who was listening. So I didn't explain in the beginning of the video. I just wanted to play the video so that the ones who joined the class, or rather those who have been studying about the reading module, can get the main context about what reading entails. So on this video specifically, we were doing the first passage, or rather the first paragraph. Remember, we said in the format of reading, you're usually given 3 paragraphs in each and every session. This was the first section actually. So and the first section actually needs to take around 15 minutes for you to be able to fill in the answers. Of course, in the video, it was a bit different because the lady was trying to explain in detail, but I hope you guys got the context of the first paragraph, or rather the first passage that you're given in your test. I hope you got the context. In this video, she was able to use the several skills that I talked about yesterday, the skimming, the scanning, and the use of keywords for her to be able to answer the question and answer the several type of questions that were given. Because in this case, we have the multiple choice questions, we have the true and false question, and we also have the matching diagram question. So I hope you guys got the context that is involved in this specific video, and at least you have an idea. You can keep on watching more videos, and you can keep on practicing and apply each and every idea that has been demonstrated by this video. So remember, I said when you're doing the reading module, you're battling against time and getting the correct answer. And remember to also use the correct spelling of names, the correct punctuation, and be more factual in terms of refer to the paragraph, refer to the passage given for you to get the correct answers, spell the words correctly. So, and if there's a question of answering just like question and answer, ensure you remember grammar, the use of synonyms. That is all I had for today. If anyone has a question, if you have something to say, you can raise your hands and share what you have. If there is no question, then you can give me a thumbs up and thank you for joining. Okay, so we'll see each other tomorrow at same time. Please ensure you also remind your friends to join, not to miss out on these sessions. They are important for their exams and their tests. Thank you for joining and have a good evening.